he told me that I had no future in the business. The guy is amazing. I had the best time with him. He's not the Billy Goat.
At 83, Harrison Ford has outlived an era. The box office records, the fedora, the whip, the Millennium Falcon, those are the myths. But behind the legend stands a craftsman, a man who rarely speaks about his emotions, yet has always spoken carefully about the actors who shaped him. Who did he study in silence before stepping onto a set? Which performances taught him restraint instead of noise? Which men showed him that dignity could be more powerful than dialogue? In interviews across decades, from press tours for Raiders of the Lost Ark to quiet conversations during the Fugitive retrospectives, Ford has revealed something subtle. Admiration, not competition, defined his view of greatness. In this video, we explore the 6 actors Harrison Ford has openly respected, studied, and quietly honored. And one of them may surprise you. Number 1. Gregory Peck. Long before the world knew him as Indiana Jones or Han Solo, Harrison Ford was a young actor studying presence, not spectacle. And one of the figures he has repeatedly acknowledged as a model of classical screen integrity was Gregory Peck. Peck's performance as Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, 1962, left a permanent mark on American cinema. Ford has spoken in interviews about admiring actors who convey strength without aggression, authority without volume. Peck embodied that philosophy. He didn't dominate scenes by force. He commanded them through moral gravity. Ford once noted that the actors he respected most were those who understood restraint, who allowed silence to carry meaning. That approach echoes Peck's style: deliberate pacing, controlled gestures, eyes that conveyed more than dialogue ever could. In Ford's own performances, particularly in films like Witness, 1985, and The Fugitive, 1993, you see a similar discipline. Emotion simmers rather than explodes. There is also the matter of dignity. Peck represented an era when leading men were expected to project ethical steadiness. Ford emerged in the more cynical 1970s, yet he preserved that same internal code. His heroes are flawed, sometimes reluctant, but they rarely abandon their moral center. That lineage traces clearly back to actors like Peck. Ford has never indulged in exaggerated praise when discussing his influences. His respect is understated, much like his acting. But when he references classic Hollywood, Peck's name surfaces with quiet certainty, not as nostalgia, not as imitation, but as a benchmark. In Gregory Peck, Harrison Ford saw proof that masculinity on screen could be thoughtful, measured, and principled. And decades later, that same quiet authority would become one of Ford's defining signatures. Number 2. Gene Hackman. If Gregory Peck represented moral steadiness, Gene Hackman represented something else entirely: volatility wrapped in precision. Harrison Ford has spoken with deep respect about Hackman's craft, particularly their time working together on The Conversation, 1974, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. Ford's role in that film was small, a young executive in a surveillance company, but Hackman carried the story as Harry Call, a paranoid, haunted wiretapper. Watching Hackman up close, Ford witnessed what total immersion looked like. In later interviews, Ford reflected on how certain actors command a scene without obvious effort. Hackman was one of them. There was no vanity in his performance, no need to appear heroic. He allowed himself to be uncomfortable, secretive, even unlikable. That fearlessness left an impression. Hackman's strength wasn't classical dignity like Peck's, it was unpredictability. In films like The French Connection, 1971, and Unforgiven, 1992, he demonstrated a rawness that felt almost dangerous. Ford, who would later build a career playing men under pressure, detectives, fugitives, presidents, absorbed that lesson. Authenticity over polish. There's a quiet irony in their connection. In The Conversation, Ford was still climbing, observing from the periphery. Hackman was already an Academy Award-winning force. Yet Ford never described that dynamic as intimidating. Instead, he framed it as educational. He saw how Hackman prepared, how he protected the integrity of a character. Years later, critics would describe Ford's own performances as grounded and unsentimental. Those qualities mirror Hackman's ethos. Strip away the excess, find the truth, stay inside the character. Ford once implied that the best actors don't perform for applause. They perform for honesty. Gene Hackman embodied that principle. And for a young Harrison Ford, standing quietly on the set of The Conversation, that example became part of his foundation. Number 3. Jack Nicholson. If Gene Hackman represented control under pressure, Jack Nicholson represented fearless exposure. Harrison Ford and Jack Nicholson never built a long list of collaborations, but they shared something deeper. They emerged from the same seismic shift in Hollywood during the late 1960s and 1970s. It was the era of anti-heroes, moral ambiguity, and raw emotional truth, and Nicholson stood at the center of that revolution. Ford has spoken in interviews about admiring actors who take risks without self-consciousness. Nicholson was the embodiment of that courage. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, 1975, he didn't just play rebellion, he lived inside it. In Chinatown, 1974, he turned cynicism into poetry. His performances were unpredictable, electric, yet grounded in sharp psychological awareness. What Ford respected most was not Nicholson's charisma, though it was undeniable, but his commitment to authenticity. Nicholson didn't protect his image. He allowed characters to be messy, flawed, even morally compromised. That kind of vulnerability requires confidence. Ford, often described as reserved in contrast, built his own screen identity through understatement. Yet, even in his restraint, you can see a shared DNA, a refusal to fake emotion. In films like Presumed Innocent, 1990, Ford leaned into ambiguity, portraying a man whose innocence was shadowed by doubt. That moral gray area was the terrain Nicholson helped normalize in American cinema. They represented two different energies, Nicholson fiery and expressive, Ford contained and deliberate, but both belonged to a generation that dismantled the polished facade of classic studio acting. Ford has never romanticized Hollywood excess, but he has acknowledged the artists who expanded its boundaries. Jack Nicholson was one of them. And in that bold expansion of what a leading man could be, Harrison Ford found both contrast and inspiration. Number 4. Tommy Lee Jones. By the time Harrison Ford met Tommy Lee Jones on the set of The Fugitive, 1993, both men were already seasoned. But what unfolded during that production would become one of the most respected actor pairings of the decade. Ford has consistently spoken with admiration about Jones's discipline and intelligence. Their on-screen dynamic, fugitive versus relentless U.S. Marshal, worked because neither actor tried to overpower the other. There was balance, precision, mutual respect. Jones's portrayal of Deputy Marshal Samuel Gerard earned him the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. But what Ford appreciated most wasn't the trophy, it was the rigor. Jones approached dialogue like a surgeon. His timing was razor-sharp. His delivery never wasted a syllable. Ford has remarked in interviews that great actors elevate everyone around them. Working opposite Jones demanded alertness. There was no room for complacency. The famous exchange, "I didn't kill my wife," / "I don't care," became iconic not because of volume, but because of conviction. Jones delivered it flat, unblinking, absolute, and Ford responded with wounded urgency. Jones understood his character's mission and never drifted from it. That focus mirrored Ford's own philosophy. Define the objective, pursue it honestly, avoid embellishment. In later reflections, Ford has described collaborations that feel like real work, not performance, but engagement. The Fugitive was one of those experiences. Tommy Lee Jones wasn't just a co-star. He was an equal force. And together, They created a rivalry that still resonates decades later. Number 5. Humphrey Bogart. Harrison Ford was born in 1942. The same year Casablanca premiered and cemented Humphrey Bogart as the face of cinematic cool. By the time Ford was old enough to understand film, Bogart had already defined an archetype, the reluctant hero with a wounded core. Ford has openly acknowledged that actors from Hollywood's golden era shaped his understanding of screen presence. Bogart, in particular, represented something that would later echo through Ford's own performances: the art of understatement wrapped in quiet defiance. In Casablanca, 1942, and The Maltese Falcon, 1941, Bogart rarely overplayed emotion. He allowed cynicism to mask vulnerability. His characters often seemed detached, but beneath the surface lay loyalty and moral reckoning. That duality, cool exterior, conflicted interior, would become central to Ford's portrayal of Han Solo in Star Wars, 1977. Ford has said in interviews that he always admired actors who didn't push their charm. Bogart never chased likability. He let it emerge naturally from conviction. That restraint felt modern, even decades later. There is also a stylistic parallel. Both men relied heavily on stillness, a glance, a pause before lighting a cigarette, a line delivered with minimal inflection that somehow carried weight. Ford absorbed that rhythm. In Blade Runner, 1982, his performance as Rick Deckard carries unmistakable noir DNA. Morally ambiguous, emotionally guarded, quietly weary. It is difficult not to see Bogart's shadow in that portrayal. Ford has never framed this as imitation. It is lineage, the passing of tone across generations. Humphrey Bogart defined the blueprint for the skeptical hero, and Harrison Ford, decades later, carried that blueprint into a new cinematic era. Number 6. Cary Grant. If Humphrey Bogart embodied cool detachment, Cary Grant represented elegance under pressure. Harrison Ford has often spoken about the importance of timing, not just dramatic timing, but tonal control. Cary Grant mastered that balance. In films like North by Northwest, 1959, and His Girl Friday, 1940, Grant moved effortlessly between suspense and wit. He could appear composed while chaos unfolded around him. That duality resonates strongly in Ford's career. In interviews over the years, Ford has acknowledged admiration for actors who could maintain intelligence and charm without sacrificing credibility. Grant did precisely that. He wasn't just handsome or charismatic, he was technically precise. His comedic rhythm was mathematical. His physicality was controlled. Even in high-stakes thrillers, he maintained refinement. When Ford portrayed Indiana Jones, that influence subtly surfaced. The humor wasn't slapstick for its own sake. It was situational, a raised eyebrow, a dry reaction to danger. Like Grant, Ford understood that levity enhances tension rather than weakening it. There is also the matter of transformation. Cary Grant famously crafted his persona carefully, shaping himself into the ideal leading man. Ford, though more reserved publicly, similarly curated a screen identity built on competence and intelligence. Neither relied on emotional excess. Both trusted timing. Ford has never described Grant as a direct model. His admiration is more reflective, a recognition of craft across time. At 83, Harrison Ford rarely speaks in grand declarations. He doesn't build monuments with words. Instead, his respect for Gregory Peck, Gene Hackman, Jack Nicholson, Tommy Lee Jones, Humphrey Bogart, and Cary Grant reveals something deeper. Greatness to him was never about volume. It was about conviction, discipline, integrity. Each of these men shaped a different facet of his screen identity: moral steadiness, fearless honesty, unpredictability, precision, cool restraint, elegant timing. Together, they form the invisible architecture behind Ford's legacy. Perhaps that is the real story. Behind every icon stands a lineage. Now I'd like to ask you, Which of these legends do you see most clearly reflected in Harrison Ford's performances? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you appreciate timeless Hollywood stories told with depth and respect, subscribe to Legendary Archives for more journeys into cinema's enduring legacy.